You know that feeling when a sneeze is brewing? You can feel it coming, even though it's faint. It builds and it brews, coming up from somewhere deep inside. You stop what you're doing. You might even hold your breath a little bit, all in anticipation of that release that's going to burst forth. There are few things as satisfying as a good sneeze after that anticipation. And there are few things as dissatisfying as having a sneeze wither away before it can be realised in its explosive fury. The lead up to this review felt much the same as a brewing sneeze. We heard rumours of the EverSolo T8 streaming transport long before it was ever released. We all felt the anticipation of having a good quality streamer at an affordable price with no built-in DAC. Just a dedicated unit that would maximise the quality of streamed audio while working with a DAC of our choosing. Everything seemed on track for a joyous realisation of the anticipation and the potential. But then, I heard the EverSolo T8 at the Shenzhen International Audio Show, and I wasn't so sure. It had the same wonderful interface as all of the other EverSolo devices, but its sound quality didn't wow me at the show. I received a pre-production unit of the T8 shortly after arriving home from the show, and I hooked it up with some mild anxiety. Was this a build-up to a fizzle? I really hoped it wasn't. By this point, I'd learned that the retail price of the EverSolo T8 streaming transport is just shy of $1,400, so it hadn't become cheaper by removing the DAC. That meant that it had to sound better instead, as in better than, say, an EverSolo DMP-A8. And there was really only one test I cared about when I first hooked it up. Was it better or worse than the Volumio Rivo Plus streamer with its Linear 5 power supply? And the answer to that question is yes. No, you didn't mishear me and I didn't misspeak. The EverSolo T8 is better than the Volumio Rivo Plus. And it's worse. Let me explain. The T8 is a very different product from the Volumio Rivo Plus. The T8 has the same gorgeous interface and touchscreen display as the other EverSolo devices. It supports every app and music streaming service you can think of, and it's going to play them back bit perfect. So you can use Apple Music, Amazon Music, Qobuz, Tidal, anything you like, and it's going to play it back with bit perfect quality. It also supports Qobuz Connect, Tidal Connect, Spotify Connect, and it's Roon Ready from day one. Despite losing the DAC that makes the EverSolo DMP-A6, A8 and A10 so versatile, the T8 has retained things like the EQ and room correction functions. That's pretty cool because it means you can now add full digital signal processing capabilities to whatever your system is, regardless of what DAC you're using. Of course, it will only apply to music streamed via the T8 because the T8 has no digital or analog inputs for external sources. But if you're predominantly streaming music, that's all you really need. As far as I can tell, the T8 has taken all of the best bits of each of EverSolo's DMP series streamers and just stripped out the DAC but kept everything else. You've got a built-in linear power supply like in the DMP-A6 Gen 2, it's got the same clocks from the DMP-A8, and as I've already said, the same incredible interface from all of them. Added to that, the T8 offers additional noise isolation in the form of a fully isolated USB output, a fully isolated I2S output, and even an SFP socket for networking. I'll come back to the networking part a bit later on. And when it comes to music streamers, my experiences would suggest that the difference between a budget and mediocre sounding streamer and a higher end, really high quality sounding streamer all comes down to noise rejection and noise isolation. If that's the case, the T8 should be brilliant with all that isolation going on. And comparing the EverSolo T8 to the Volumio Rivo Plus proved that noise isolation and noise rejection has absolutely paid off. These two streamers are very much 100% comparable. When I asked before if the T8 was better or worse than the Rivo Plus, and my answer was yes, it's because they're very different devices. Both have their strengths and both have their weaknesses. And a lot of that will come down to which connections you're using. For For a direct comparison between these two devices, my only real option was to take a coaxial output from both, one from the Rivo Plus and one from the T8. That meant I could then switch quickly and easily and rapidly between both streamers and really understand the differences. In that particular setup with the Rivo Plus using its custom linear power supply, I felt like the Rivo Plus had the tiniest edge in terms of detail retrieval or clarity, you could say, but it was less than a 1% difference. Some might prefer that extra tiny sense of crispness from the Rivo Plus. Others might actually prefer the slightly relatively smoother sound of the T8. The key takeaway is that if you weren't directly comparing these side by side, you would never know the difference between them. However, things start getting a little bit more challenging when you compare these two, when you start thinking about the range of connection options available. Both devices offer excellent USB and I2S outputs, and with some devices, like Volumio's own Preciso DAC, the USB output from the Rivo Plus is slightly better than the I2S output. I'll discuss that more in the Volumio Preciso review, so be sure that you subscribe to see that one is coming very, very soon. With the T8, I felt like the I2S output had the edge over any of the other outputs on the T8, but that could also depend a little bit on which DAC you're using. As I switched up the different connection types being used and the DACs that I was using them with, it became very clear to me that the T8 and the Rivo Plus are just directly interchangeable. In other words, I would be choosing these based on the design you like the look of, the type of interface that you want, and maybe the connection types that you need. It wouldn't come down to sound quality at all for me. The Rivo Plus is wonderfully discreet and compact, and for systems where you want to drive everything through a smartphone app or maybe from Roon, the Rivo Plus is just brilliant. But if you want the ability to use either of those control options, a smartphone or Roon, and the ability to control playback and select the music you're listening to on the device itself, plus the ability to use pretty much any app you can think of to stream your music from, that's where the T8 is absolutely incredible. And this is all before we unleash the superpower of the EverSolo T8. Ethernet connections can very easily carry noise into your streamer. Wi-Fi connections theoretically will be generating noise actually inside the streamer. With the T8, you can avoid both of those sources of noise by setting up a fiber network connection. And if you don't already have fiber networking in your home, as I didn't, you can set it up very, very easily just for use with the T8. Basically, all you need to do is buy a little Ethernet to what they call SFP conversion box, and add to that a couple of SFP fiber transceivers. If you are going to be doing this for the T8, you need 1310 nanometer transceivers, and they need to be SFP, not SFP+. And how it all looks is that the transceiver is this little guy here that slides into this socket here. You then connect your optical fiber from here to the converter box, which has another one of these little silver transceivers in it, and away you go. Once you've got the cables all set up and connected, the conversion from an electrical signal coming through your Ethernet cables into a fiber optic cable going to the T8 means that any noise in your network is left behind before the conversion or at the conversion into the optical cable. In theory, that should be or could be beneficial to the sound. In practice, it depends a little bit. In my setup, it made no difference at all. But that's likely because I'm already using a very high quality Ethernet connection where noise has already been isolated through the Ethernet by using an uptone ether regen unit. In other words, your mileage may vary. If you've got just a standard regular Ethernet setup, it probably will vary from mine. But the good part of all this is it's very simple to set up. It's not a huge investment, and I can link through in the description down below to the specific things that I have used in my setup, which I now know will work. It's a relatively quick, easy, and small investment experiment to make, and you might just get even better sound as a result. And by the way, you don't have to go down the path of fiber optic networking to make the T8 a good device. I was already finding it directly comparable with the Rivo Plus, even without the fiber installed. My initial listening notes were all done without the fiber. I then added the fiber, and as I said, it made no difference for me, but it could be for you that having the ability to add fiber optic and isolate any noise in your system can bring the T8 to a different level of performance compared to a different streamer that doesn't have fiber. And to help just contextualize that for you, let's talk a bit more about the Rivo Plus and the T8 again. The Rivo Plus that I've spoken about and said is directly comparable with the T8 was already the best streamer that I have heard for anything below something like the $6,000 Lumen U2. And that means that the T8 gets exactly the same honor. It is comfortably equal with the Rivo Plus, the best pure streaming device I've heard below the Lumen U2. And that means that compared to the EverSolo DMP-A6 Gen 2 or the EverSolo DMP-A8, the T8 delivers a more open soundstage with better separation of all the individual sounds. On top of that, everything just sounds a little bit more refined from the T8. And what I mean when I say refined is that the sound is smoother, but it's no less detailed, it's no less resolving. You're going to hear everything, it's just going to be delivered better. And so basically, if you're looking for an EverSolo streamer and you don't need a DAC, the T8 is absolutely the best way to go. That's compared to the DMP-A6 version 1 or version 2 and the DMP-A8. Do keep in mind I haven't heard the EverSolo DMP-A10, so I can't compare that. And so we could actually just end the video there with a huge recommendation for the EverSolo T8. But let's talk just briefly about some of the various connection options in case you're wondering how to integrate this into your system. Of course, there are the regular SPDIF connections or Sony Philips digital interface connections, which is your coaxial, your optical, and your AES connections. And those are all solid outputs from the T8. But my listening test would suggest that if you do have the ability to use either the USB connection or the I2S connection, those seem to be slightly superior on the T8. And when I went to compare the I2S and the USB outputs to work out which was better from the T8, I noticed something curious. For some reason, the T8 defaulted to a maximum sample rate output of just 44.1 kHz when using I2S. That might be because the unit I have here is a pre-production unit. It might have been used for testing. It might have even been a demo unit at a show. I'm not sure. And so maybe the 44.1 kHz output was a setting that somebody else had made. But it also might be that it's some kind of default setting. So do be sure if you're setting up a T8 and you're using I2S, make sure to press the little cog button to go into the settings and set your I2S output on the T8 to the maximum sample rate that your DAC will handle. In many cases, it's going to be all the way up to 768 kHz. And if you've got a T8 and you're watching this video after you've got it and you've used the I2S settings, then let us know in the comments, did yours default to 44.1 or was it already set to the maximum 768 kHz? I'd be curious to know if that was just a quirk of the pre-production unit that I've got here. And so once I'd fixed that little anomaly and I had both USB and I2S outputting maximum sample rates, the comparison between the two outputs was very, very close. But to me, the soundstage seemed a little bit deeper and the sense of layering of sounds a little bit better when using I2S. I also feel like I heard slightly better sense of resolution and a little bit more separation of sounds with I2S. And so I would stick with I2S in that sort of a setup, but it's also worth keeping in mind that some of this is going to depend on the DAC you're connecting it to. I was using the brand new Napolern Explorer R2R DAC for this testing, and I haven't yet determined if that works better with USB than it does with I2S. And then there's the interconnects you're using, all of it comes into play. What mattered most to me was that both the USB and the I2S outputs were clearly superior to my ears over the SPDIF outputs, optical, coaxial, and AES. And so if you can, I would recommend using USB or I2S from the T8. If you can't, you're still getting great sound from the other outputs. It just gets even better with I2S and USB. And now just one final point about the outputs. If you're planning a system around the T8, it is worth knowing that you can't send multiple digital outputs from the T8 through all different protocols. You can choose to send the digital output only through I2S, or only through USB, or you can have it go out through all of the SPDIF outputs at once. So you can run a coaxial, an optical, and an AES connection all at the same time because they're all the one protocol. But if you want a USB connection, it's on its own. If you want I2S, it's on its own. Of course, you can still connect different devices to each of those outputs. It just means that you're going to have to use the fantastic EverSolo phone app, or you're going to have to use the touchscreen interface to tell the T8 which particular output to use at any point in time. Either way, it's still pretty quick and pretty easy, and it does make the T8 a very versatile and easy to use device. And so that, my friends, is the conclusion and the realization of a long brewing sneeze. That sounds so weird as I say it now, so far removed from the intro. What I mean though is that the T8 has absolutely delivered on the promise of a fantastic streaming transport, in other words no DAC, from EverSolo. and it's done so at a relatively affordable price when you consider that it's the next best thing to going up to a $6,000 Lumenu 2, at least based on everything I've tested. If you want one, that is an EverSolo T8, I'll put a link or some links, I don't know yet, whatever I can find I'll put in the description. Or if you do want to know what that next tier of performance looks like and whether you think it's worth spending more money, I've pinned a video here at the end with my review of the Lumenu 2 that I talked about before. So watch that one next if you want to find out how it is that streaming can get even better still. But for now, I want to send a huge thanks to YouTube channel members, also to channel Patreon members, and of course to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.